everybody, and welcome to the Rabbit Trail Podcast. This is episode 109.
109.
Yes.
Hey, we got it right.
Hey, we did. All right, and my name is Greg Harris, the senior pastor here at the sponsor of this podcast, Olive Branch Community Church, and we're glad you're joining with us. This is the podcast where we're going to chase the truth wherever it runs, and that typically means we're going to bring up issues that came from the sermon that was done on Sunday, or things that were dropped, or questions that you guys have, or just random things that come through Brent's head.
Random things,
yeah.
like sponsored by Olive Branch Church. So we need to take a commercial break from our sponsor. Ladies and gentlemen, please love, live, and share Christ wherever you go. Now back to the regular programming.
That was...
It was like very Ben Shapiro of you, I guess. Or
very
YouTube-y.
like straight out of YouTube, man. And this week we've been brought to you by Downy. Downy's the quicker software picker. Okay. Well, anyway, I didn't preach this week. Instead, my co-host Steven, you preached, man.
Yeah.
Will you say hi and
Hello.
let everybody know why we're insane?
Yes.
Oh, and
Well,
I
that'll
just
take longer
I just
than
want
the
to say
podcast.
this too real quick. Let me see if I can open it up.
No, here we go.
No, I got
We're on a rabbit trail in the rabbit trail.
somebody texted me while I was in the elevator coming up here to record, and they said,
elevator here.
"I think I'm too late for the rabbit trail, but I wanted to just say how wonderful the message was on Sunday.
Oh.
It stirred up a lot of questions within me, leaving me to think and to search and do an inventory of what kind of a leader I am to my staff at work. So thank you, Stephen, for the amazing teaching. Boom, chakalaka.
Oh,
I was
thanks.
sitting next
Thank
to
you.
her at first service when you opened with your joke, and we both laughed, and that was funny too.
No.
Awesome.
I thought you were going to say they came from me for a second there. I was like, wait.
Oh, yeah. No.
Well, thanks, man. I appreciate those comments. It's always good to hear from you guys. And I love the podcast for us at the church just because it allows you guys the freedom to come up and chat with us. It feels like I can have a dialogue with you when you're driving in your work to car, or your car to work, your work to car.
Yeah, I've never driven my work to my car, but that'd be
I
interesting.
don't know. That would be interesting.
Now,
I'm
if
sure
you're
somebody's
Uber,
done it. If you're Ubering,
you're driving your work.
you're driving your work and it's your car. So yeah, no, it's great. Thank you guys for those who came up and encouraged me. It was a great time to connect with you guys. But for those who don't know who I am, my name is Stephen Oldham. I'm the local outreach coordinator here. And if you want to hear that sermon or any of the ones that Greg's preached or anyone else, they're on our YouTube channel. And if you're watching this on our YouTube channel, thank you. Hit the subscribe and the like button. And if you hit the bell icon, it'll remind you of when all of our videos come up, including the sermon ones. So,
And if you're still after my heart listening on a podcast like my son Nate
the
does,
audio podcast.
the audio side, share it. Let somebody know. Give us a review. It helps kind of move things forward. And, we'd love to get to know some more people.
iTunes, Spotify. There are many places to find us audio-wise as well.
We are
And
on
if
the
you have any
interweb.
questions, we haven't had a lot of questions come through here the last few weeks. So if you want to get one in, we would love to discuss it. And you can send that to rabbittrail@obcc.church. rabbittrail@obcc.church.
And so I'm just curious, do you think people don't ask questions because we're just so good at preaching, or do you think they're scared of having a 15-minute answer?
Yeah, probably that. Or they probably don't know what to ask. I had people talk to me and goes, I don't know what I would write. I was like, you just gave me a 15-minute conversation. Like, write that.
Yeah.
But at least they feel more comfortable coming up to us, so at least they're getting our answers. So.
I mean, we get people giving comments that we interpret, and
well, we
that's
do
fun.
get comments. I don't always know what they mean because it's like reading a fortune cookie backwards. So you're like, just words, but they mean something to you. So
we like word salads.
whether something hits you positively or negatively, that's awesome. If you really do want to think through a deeper question on that, rabbit trail at obcc.church would be the place to draft a question. But yeah, if something struck you and you were still thinking about it, whether it's positive or negative, that's a good way to respond to us.
And if you're ever confused, like, what was the website again? I'm sure a lot of you guys have our cell phone numbers. So, at some point.
I'm not posting my cell phone number.
We're not
on
posting
the
it,
internet.
but I mean, a lot of us have friends that are listening.
555.
So just text us and ask the question, and then we'll make sure that it gets on here too.
And then
So-
Brent, at the end of this, if you stick around long enough, is going to post his credit card number with the security code.
Yeah, and that will help you guys if you wanted to purchase a subscription to this website. You can use my credit card to do that. So that way I get miles and I can fly places for free. So
As long as they pay you back.
It's the honor system.
Yeah. Do you have to pay credit cards back?
Depends on who you are in this country.
Yeah, because I don't want to be a what is that? A servitude?
Yeah,
Indentured
you're an indentured servant to the government. Or
Yeah,
to the,
I don't want to go to jail.
Well, quick question: did you guys vote?
We did.
I did.
It was Super Tuesday yesterday.
It was
I wore my
Tuesday. Is that
sticker.
like like the other super thing that's like trademarked and you're not supposed to ever say it? It's
Oh,
like
yeah.
Super Tuesday. Did like the government
Bully
trademark that,
balls.
so we're in trouble?
Bully balls.
I don't know
You say
that they did that.
The foot statement ball tournament that you can't say the name of because it's been trademarked.
The not
Super
soccer.
Bowl.
Oh, that one. Yeah, that one.
Yeah, you're not supposed
We'll see
to
if we'll
say
be
that.
on YouTube still.
Disney. We're going to break all of them. We're going to be shut down in no time.
For at last I've seen
Yeah, you have to
the
sing,
light.
Now that'll get us in trouble.
I'm sorry.
So, all right. So, just really quick, bad joke day was what nursery rhyme encapsulates the gospel?
Oh gosh, nursery rhymes are horribly scary.
Mary had a little lamb.
Okay.
Oh, my mom used to sing a song called "I'm Going Crazy." You
Yeah.
ever hear it? Like, it's like, "I'm going crazy. Don't you want to come along? I'm going crazy." Just singing the song, and then it would go to the third verse, which was, "When Mary had a little lamb, the doctor was surprised. When old MacDonald had a farm, the doctor nearly died."
Wow.
That's like awesome. So that's what that made me think of.
Well, my brain hurts.
I remember like in the 70s, when, people were like, don't have a cow. And the comeback was always, why not? Mary had a little lamb.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Boom, like we are so mature here.
Oh, the 70s.
Yes.
I noticed that we skipped over that fashion real quick.
What year were you born?
What?
What year were you born?
78.
Okay, so you were in the 70s?
We're all in the 70s here. I mean, I don't remember. I remember a
remember.
little bit, but not much.
I mean, the 70s is where I grew up because I was born in 62.
I was an 80s kid.
So I was 8 by the time 1970 came, and I graduated high school. And
I didn't realize how much of I was an 80s kid until I started really sitting down going like, I am a total 80s kid. Like He-Man and G.I. Joe
Rubik's
and
Cube and-
Rubik's Cubes and Transformers.
Cabbage Patch
and,
Kids.
And the original, Mum Ra is fighting off the, all that crazy
Thundercats,
stuff.
by the way.
Thundercats, I love that.
He-Man.
Yeah, that was the
He-Man.
Thunder.
That just seemed like a disgusting cartoon to me. There was nothing in
Hour of Power. He-Man, She-Ra, back to back, 4 o'clock.
The hour
My
of power.
son-in-law loves He-Man. And
That's what that was.
By the power of
Grace.
grace.
Robotech, and then He-Man.
I still remember
Voltron.
back when Voltron was on running reruns. I still
Yep.
can remember some of that fun stuff.
I also remember things like, Racer. What was it? Speed Racer.
Speed Racer.
Speed Racer. I remember that. Chim Chim. Yeah. Kimba the White Lion.
Yep.
I can still remember the Jetsons and the,
I remember
Gigantor, the
Captain-
giant robot.
Captain
and
Kangaroo.
my favorite growing up, Land of the Lost.
Had the
And
Lost.
with the dinosaurs?
Oh, that was so weird. It was like,
it was a
what
weird
is
show,
this?
man.
It was weird, but I was too young to understand what was going on. I just knew there were
wasn't a bad
dinosaurs.
show.
and they would like run down the rapids every season. It was
Sid and Marty Krofft were really, really interesting guys.
so. I love how we went from Super Tuesday, ignored that, and went straight to the 80s. That's perfect.
It makes more sense.
And that's because voting is so polemic. So let me ask you this. One of the cool things is your son, Nate, just turned 18. So this was actually really the first time that Addie or Nate got to vote for
No,
president.
Adeline voted in the last president.
4 years ago?
Yeah. Yeah.
She's not 21.
Not president. No. Sorry.
This is their first presidential election.
Well, this is the primary, but yes.
primary.
Yeah.
She voted. What'd she vote last time? She's voted one other time before.
Well, they had the recall in California, so you're voting for governor.
But this is both of their first time to be able to vote for a president.
Well, president candidate for a party.
So going to that, who was running the first time you got to vote for a president?
Well, for me, our school did this thing. Like one of the teachers said, "I will let the kids vote, and I'll vote for whoever they choose."
Really?
And so we all
Yeah, that
cast
was
our
popular
ballots. It was Bush, Perot, and Clinton, and Perot won at the school. So
Really?
They did that at Rainey, too, in town at the time of that. I remember
that's
that.
probably my first vote. I think
So you got to kind of cast a vote. Right?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
my first one was really.
Did you vote for Perot?
Peru.
No.
No, you didn't. Okay. My first presidential election was between...
George Washington.
No.
No.
I am older than you guys. It was
An
Jimmy
English-
Carter for his second term, and it was Ronald Reagan for his first term. And so those were the two candidates. And I voted for Jimmy Carter. I know. But the reason being because at 18 I was I had integrity and knowledge
You like
and
peanuts.
depth of character. And at that time we had hostages in Iran forever, and Ronald Reagan was talking about bringing back the draft, and Jimmy Carter said absolutely not. And I had hair down to the middle of my back. I did not want to get my hair cut and go into the military, so I voted for Jimmy Carter.
All right.
And I lost, luckily. Boom, chakalaka.
Who was yours?
It would have been that election, but I would have been old enough to vote. So it would have been Perot, Clinton, and Bush. That would have been the
I
three.
think mine was my actual first one was Bob Dole and
Dole.
Clinton.
Bob Dole and Clinton. Wow.
What about 96? I think that would have been 96. Yeah.
Now, did you grow up in a conservative
Middle of the road.
political house or
Back and
liberal?
forth. Back and forth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, my family, I think, was more or less conservative voting wise. Nancy's mom, very, very. I mean, Democratic ticket. Just punched the Democratic ticket. It didn't matter who was running. And I remember who was running. I don't remember who was running, but Alyssa brought up the fact that my mother-in-law was going to vote Democrat, and she's like, "How could you?" And I was like, "Honey, if Jesus Christ ran on the Republican ticket and Satan himself ran on the Democratic ticket, your grandma would vote Democrat." And Nancy looked at. I said that right in front of my mother-in-law too, and my mother-in-law just rolled her eyes like, "Oh my goodness!" And Nancy was shocked, but she's like, "Only you could get away with something like that.
Yeah,
my mom loves you and thinks you're funny."
Wow.
Yeah. So
Well, I mean, let's actually jump into something
substantial.
substantial. Now, if you're still with us and
Back
haven't
to the 80s
been put to
cartoons
sleep,
then.
yeah. How does the 80 cartoons fit with modern cartoons, considering the Ninja Turtles in the early 90s?
You can do a podcast on that.
No, but Stephen, you preached on
I preached on
First Peter
chapter 2, verses 18 to 25.
3.
And this is masters and servants and the whole relationship between suffering in unjust conditions in order to show the kind of how that suffering is gracious in the eyes of God.
Yeah, and so it is the contrast series, is what it is, and this one was on labor. Right?
Yeah.
So,
I thought it was like
my
I was
subtitle.
like
You
sitting next to
working
my
for the
wife,
man.
going like,
Are you
"Is this for women to contrast in their labor, like how they look?"
That's why I didn't say that particular word, but I don't know, that wasn't the only reason, but I said work so that it was
yeah.
clear that we're not talking about the labor union or whatever that is, but
Labor.
but yeah.
labor and contrast, and your wife was more in the camp of labor and contractions.
Contrast.
I also had to make sure that while we talked about work, that I included being a mother in the work.
Yeah, you did good.
Okay, because I was really worried because most labor conversation, especially if a guy is talking, typically skews for the in that direction. But man, there's so many different ways that you labor with your family. You know what I mean? Just taking care of someone that's like a sick parent, where there's usually someone who's a care provider, and that typically ends up being a woman that takes care of another woman, and women who take care of the family, but also women do work as well. So that would have applied already. So
I did get a text message, and they did have a question that deals with work and labor. So it kind of will fit in here before we get into the meat of this. But she was asking because she loved your sermon.
oh, cool.
And she said that how do you work with a boss with ethical issues? I always look for opportunities to share my faith with her, and have even prayed with her in her office. She does good for a while and then resorts back to her bad behavior. And not sure it's a question, but just seeking ways to share my faith and not condone her behavior because she confides in me. So
Yeah, that's rough without the details, because what kind of
Yes.
ethical behavior, if it's a legal problem that would set the company back, I think as a Christian, you're obligated to report crimes. So I don't think it's that. But if it is, I would say there's no amount of confidence that I could have in someone that would allow me to let them do things that I find to be illegal in general. And I have to say that because I have heard people get in situations where they overlook some kind of criminal activity at work in order to be kind to someone. And this goes back to the problem that Christians often have. Our kindness gets ahead of what's the ultimate kindness, which is truth and kindness, or love and kindness. And the most loving thing you can do, not just to that person, but everyone that they work with, is to say, this isn't appropriate. I care about you. I'll be alongside you, but I have to report you. Mm-hmm. And so there are things that are legally and morally wrong. Now, there are things that are legally and aren't immoral. There are things I think that the law has set in our country that is immoral, and I would not then do that, because it would be something that would be a violation of my conscience, like some kind of abortion law that I have to advocate for because I'm the president of a company or something like that. That came up with, I think it was Hobby Lobby, who had been told by the government that they gave 16 forms of contraception, but 2 of them they wouldn't, because they were like abortion pills, and everybody was coming down on them and pressuring on them. They were like, no, we're not going to do this, even though it's legal and it's trying to be mandated. We don't care. And so they would rather pay the fines than do that. So there again, but if you're talking about immoral, I would have to know what that is. If it's like cussing or if it's just being mean to people, that would be a different kind of situation. But being mean to someone, I think, would be more about how close are you to them? What positions do you have? Can you defend someone's honor?
Yeah, I think there's in my mind, what goes to an illustration that Tim Keller gave and Tress shared with me a long time ago, and it just kind of welded into my head about one of the ways that I think that he did a good job of like untying the fact that we don't stand firm and still love anymore. And he talked about a woman who had a father that she would call him at night and she would say, hey, Dad, and she'd talk to him, and he would start getting mad and yelling at her and screaming at her. She'd go, well, if you're going to yell and scream at me, then I'm going to hang up now. I love you. Goodbye. Yeah. And she would hang up. And the next night she would call him and talk to him. Hey, Dad, I love you. How you doing? And if you started yelling at her, she'd go, hey, if you're going to yell at me, I'm going to hang up. And if he wouldn't stop, she would hang up. And she did this so consistently that eventually he apologized and stopped yelling at her, because he was like, I don't know why I'm doing this. But it was so obvious that she loved him, though she was suffering this boundary. Yeah. And that's the kind of thing, like, there may be a case here where you have to draw the boundary and just go, I'm not going to accept you treating me like this. I understand you're my boss, and I
do it in private if you can. Talk to them one-on-one.
But I'm not going. And then the next day, come in and say, "How are you doing? I care about you. I know we're friends. Well, you drew a. Hey, well, if you're going to treat me like this, I'm going to draw the boundary again. But I care about you. I'm not going to stop the relationship." We're just not good at that anymore.
We also don't want to suffer, and that again, as the passage says that you're called to suffering for doing good. That's a good thing to suffer in that situation. It doesn't feel good. But when you're constantly, consistently showing the love and truth of the gospel.
You're trying to tell me that doing good doesn't always feel good?
It seldom feels as good as I thought the way people talk, you would think it was the greatest feeling ever. It doesn't feel good at the moment. Usually it's that the most loving things never feel good at the moment, oftentimes because they require sacrifice.
That reminds me of what Jesus says when he tells you to love your enemies. Like, what good is it to love someone who loves you back? There's everybody does that. That's just
no proven character.
That doesn't stand out. And we think that, well, it felt good. I did this good thing. I stood for this group. I went out and did this. But read the really real, like, powerful good things, like we've been talking about in the series, are the ones that don't feel good, though they are very good. And that's the hardest thing about really doing the good works that matter in this world. But yeah, in her case, I guess it would be just, do you need to draw a boundary and just keep pushing into the relationship? And that's hard, but it's kind of the...
Yeah, and it depends on that, because some people kind of like to verbally abuse people. They think they're being funny, but they're being mean and all these things. Some of that I will just endure until we get to a relational point where I say, I don't really care for that.
Quit calling me Robert.
Yeah. That's a joke nobody's going to understand.
I know.
But
But sometimes inside jokes are fun.
for those of you who do understand, that's funny. But no, yeah. And if you want to tell us, we don't have to put it on the podcast, but if you'd like to tell us, it helps to be more specific. But in general, those are the concepts, that we talk about. But because it is tough, and we need each other to do that. You're going to need the support of your small group and your friends and family.
So, I mean, other than dealing with something face to face with somebody, when you see things that are going on, like say, this person is in a supervisory position, they don't like somebody, so they're kind of fabricating and making life miserable for this person because they want to get rid of them and writing them up on things that they're not really being fair in the sense that they're not writing up about everybody else. Are these things that, you should go and tell on them about? Or, I mean, how do you deal with that when you're seeing things that are not the most ethical ways of doing business?
I've been in a situation very similar to
So
this.
should Christians be tattletales at work? Or...
Yeah, I didn't want to share this during the sermon because it felt aggrandizing or whatever, but I guess it fits the category. When I was in the military, I had an officer who had made a decision to tell me to go remove some furniture that he had purchased and take it to the dump, what we call the dump. It was called something else, but they call it what you would call a dump. And then he was going to go away, and he was gone. So I put that detail together with the help of the sergeants that are in charge, the non-commissioned officers, and I put all the junk away. I got the airman to put it there. And when he came back, someone had told him, "Where's that furniture? I want it." And he was like, "Oh, I ordered someone." But he wanted me to throw someone under the bus. He wanted me to blame an MCO for making the decision that he made so that he could cover himself. And he wanted me to do it. And he had called me in the office, started screaming and yelling at me, I want a name. And I was like, now I have like everyone, like what's going to happen? Because the commanding officer has enough. And I was like, I'm going to get bad reports now. I could get demoted. I could get put on really bad assignments. I could be treated really bad. This could destroy my career. So it's beneficial to me to say, because I did work with the NCOs, to say, well, that one did this. And I was just the stress of going like, I don't want to be kicked out of the military because I didn't do anything, and so I have to decide, do I want to please this boss and have a comfortable life but have to live with myself, or do I want to do what's right and it may cost me everything and I would be embarrassed and I would have to explain this to people. And in the end, I was at the time running a singles ministry. So for me to look at that and go, well, what is the church going to think of me? What is God going to think of me? What are people going to think of me that know I'm a Christian at work? And I told him, I'm sorry, sir, after being yelled at for 25 minutes, I can't give you a name. You made this decision and I carried it out as you ordered me to. And I did that with the help of everyone. But that's what happened, and I don't have anyone to give you. So he yelled and screamed at me. And then when I left, the first sergeant pulled me aside and goes, we're going to protect you. Thank you for doing that, not throwing me under the bus, not throwing all these. I didn't know everybody was watching. I didn't know this was a theater event. But what it taught me was you have to come to a point in your life. Do you want to be what God wants you to be character-wise, or do you want to please man? And pleasing man will get you ahead. But in the end, you have to live with yourself. What does that make me as a person? And so that taught me right away, I don't want to be a man pleaser. I don't want to be a person. I want to be able to say with all due diligence, no matter how bad my life gets, that it's okay because God was okay with what I did.
And I found also through my life that if you sear your conscience enough, you can still live with yourself. That's that's what I've found.
Well, layers and layers. They just keep
layers.
You keep putting them on. I thought we were supposed to peel them off, Brent.
Layers of scar tissue.
No, that's true though. I mean, that's very true. That there was like a movie called Crimes and Misdemeanors that was about guys making up their own existence. This guy kills somebody in the movie, and he's really bad about it. No one caught him, so he just admitted to himself, "Oh, if no one catches him, then it must be a good thing. So I'm just going to live this good life." And I was like, that's a life that doesn't think there's any consequences to the choices you make.
So, and I will tell you, the first one is the hardest one. So,
yeah, the first layer. Oh my goodness. What I think is important is that, like I said in the last sermon last week, was that if you're going to choose, like in a civil disobedience situation, if you're going to choose that, you're choosing the repercussions, because you are doing something that is going to break a relationship when you go with your conscience against whatever is actually the pressure of the system, the pressure of the reality. And again, I think that's really what the text is getting at in this case, where it's saying, why would you suffer for the things that you've done wrong, but suffer for the good? And the reason he gets there is, and I'll just take it from here into, is that, I know there's a lot of conversation we'd have about servants and slaves and stuff, but the background of this text in 1 Peter chapter 3 is Isaiah 50, 52 and 53, which is this section that we know as the suffering servant, or you could translate it the suffering slave. And so when we look at this, and he's saying, servants, be subject to your masters. Well, what is his model for this except Jesus himself, who was the suffering servant? And so if Jesus is willing to do that which will bring him the greatest pain, which was to stand against who everybody loved. Everybody loved the Pharisees. People didn't hate the Pharisees. The Pharisees weren't the bad guys. They were the people everybody awed and adored. They were your celebrity, super uber Jewish people at the time. I don't like how people paint them as like they were religious hypocrites. No, everybody liked them.
Not all of them were bad, like the ones that went after Christ either.
But Jesus had to tell them, and he had to tell them off, and he had to stand for the good, even though he knew, hey, this is going to lead me to the cross. This is going to lead me to death. And so when you make that choice, you are identifying, Peter is saying, with the suffering servant. And that's why he starts to repeat all that stuff. He says, for this you've been called, because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example, so that you might follow in his steps. Those are steps I don't think a lot of us want to follow in, to be quite honest. So,
yeah.
Wow, that kind of dropped real quick.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah. Thank you.
We're all kind of tired.
No, I was just thinking about just the heaviness of like, okay, you have to really do pick up your cross and follow Christ, and so I don't know. That's why
it's just heavy. I think it's just downplayed. It's not popular preaching. It's not popular in the church, but it's inevitable.
Yay, everybody, let's suffer.
And it's super inevitable. It's
why
coming.
would they do that?
Like whether you like it or not. And what does Paul say? Everyone who wants to live godly will be persecuted, right? I mean, it's kind of just like in the mix. Like we've lived such comfortable, extravagant Christian lives in some ways, much like the early Romans who kind of had to suddenly go, oh crud, I was comfortable, now I'm a Christian, this isn't going to be comfortable anymore, and that's a tough sell. But I think it actually shines brighter in a culture of comfort if we were to really live that way.
Yeah, all of our heroes are the ones that we admire because they usually sacrificed or suffered in some way. Yeah. And I don't know many people like, that guy had the most comfortable life.
What does it mean if Homer Simpson's my hero? I'm just kidding.
You might want the comfortable life like that person because it's like wish fulfillment. But in the end, you look at those rock star videos where everybody has all of they have all this drugs and they have all these women and they're like miserable and sad and depressed and addicted. And you're just like, they have everything. Everybody wants to do that. And then you realize those people who have all of that typically are the ones that know that it doesn't feel right. Something doesn't feel right. And I think that's because you really are called to suffer or sacrifice or work hard for that thing which is good and not just for your own self. I think that's empty. The big lie that I think the world tells you is to work for yourself, get everything you want, and be as comfortable as possible. And those aren't the heroes that we admire. That those are the people that we look at and kind of like wonder. We like to watch their stories, but we don't want to be in them. I don't want to be in the story where the rock star has control over her family and just treats everybody like garbage, or just you watch all these biopics and you're like, this is not fun. Like, this doesn't look fun to me. It looks interesting, but not fun.
Now you talked a lot about slavery, indentured servitude and stuff like that too. And we can get into that in a minute, but a lot of it was built on the fact that you had a debt. You didn't have the finances to pay it off. So here in America, we just claim bankruptcy and move on, and your slate's wiped clean. But back in the day, there wasn't that. you owed somebody, you had to pay them off, so you would be their servant or whatever and work their farm or whatever until the debt was paid off. And if it wasn't paid off, then there was that year of Jubilee, and every 7 years. And so I kind of wanted to talk about that because I thought I understood that. I've never really done a deep dive into it, but I thought I understood it. And then I realized today before we started that I don't know anything about that, because you were saying that, the celebration of Jubilee, and then everybody would release all their slaves. That's every 7 years. I thought they were one and the same. So I was kind of like going, yeah, okay, so if you've only been a slave for 2 years, and the year of Jubilee comes up, do you only serve for 2 years? And you were like, no. That national aspect of it was every 49 years or something. So just number one, explain a little bit about the Feast of Jubilee or the celebration of Jubilee, how that really worked out, and really whether or not it was an ideal that was never followed, or if that was something that really did take place.
Yeah, well, the year of Jubilee is, I guess, Leviticus. So it's Leviticus.
There's a lot in Leviticus.
Yeah, it's probably talked about in several locations, and it's the blasting of the horn, and it's a celebration. And in the ancient world, it was kind of an alleviation of all the debts and obligations to reset the country back to a state where in Israel, it was going back to the boundaries of the families and the allocations, kind of like a resetting of everything to get back to a sense where they were when the Promised Land was first occupied.
Okay, so again, I don't know if you know the details, all the details, but now bringing that up, right? Mm-hmm. So it would reset boundary lines. So, you take this area that's 3 square miles, this city, right? And so now the families get their land back after a certain period of time. They get their land back, so nobody is destitute and poor and, doesn't have property forever. But there are some families, right, that maybe came aboard and didn't have property lines at that point, or was just everybody
everybody was in a family of some kind.
In fact, when they would conquer more land, they would designate families in those tribes, or extra land. So you usually had a plot of land that was considered yours. And now remember, there's a lot of land, and we're talking about like
it was a lot back in the original allocation.
It's not.
Current Israel.
It makes me think of like Europeans who are like. We had some friends years ago who knew some good European friends, and they would just be like, "Oh my gosh, the world is overpopulated. There's just no more room anymore." And because they're talking about like England and Europe, and then they came to America and they were driving through the desert, and they're like, "We take that back."
Yeah,
like there's what in the world? There's so much open space in this country, and they were just, and we don't realize like. We're not talking about gigantic agricultural farms and huge acreage. We're talking about like a plot of land that was for your family. And then they would have enough that was just open land that you would add that, and it was capable of being kind of included. And
it is incredible how much land we have. Because I did hear a statistic once that were saying if you took everybody that lived in the United States, you could fit them in the state of Texas.
I've heard similar things.
And it's kind of like, okay, really crowded, there is a lot of land.
So the idea behind is everyone knows when the year of Jubilee is coming up. It's not a mystery. So if you start taking on things and doing certain things, it's on you if you do that. But also the idea behind the year of Jubilee is the fact that it's about forgiveness and redemption. And that's the theme that carries over. And so the idea that, everybody's going to get hurt a little bit, but everybody's going to get free is just, okay, God bless me with land. I'm letting these people go. That's every 50 years. But it wasn't just done by them. The Israelites did it not around a king. They did it around God. God declared every 50 years, or every 7 times 7. So it's 49. And then after that, the 50th year is the year of Jubilee. And that was to show that he was the king. But what would happen a lot in Egypt, if a new king came, he just wanted everybody to like him. He would just forgive all the debts, and everybody would be like, "You're so awesome, king. We worship you. You're the greatest." And that would rally people. And he let the slaves go. And so Egypt did this, others. But this is different because it's required, because God wants it, and he cares for people, and he wants to reset the boundaries and give people a second chance.
So no one would be destitute.
So no one would be destitute. And it's very different than any other ancient world. Now, Now, every 7 years, though, you would have to free anybody that was under contract with you. And that was just something they did because of the law, separate from the year of Jubilee. So they're similar in the sense that the idea that you're forgiven after a period of time and given grace, that's the similar idea. But every 7 years, it was just, hey, if you're 7 years, you let slaves go. The Old Testament slavery is very different because people would strive to rather be in slavery in Israel. It was meant to, because the other places, they were way more oppressed. So if you were in Egypt, there's a lot of times you're just stuck. You're not even considered a human. Most of the writings of the ancient world, the words for servants and slaves had nothing to do with them being like human. The human people were kind of the ones in the upper class, or maybe just the king. Everyone else was okay to abuse in any way you saw fit.
Yeah, this is just one of those misnomers. Like, I love I get people are going to like bash on ancient Hebrews and stuff like that. But it was Aristotle in his Nicomachean Ethics that literally says slaves are a different kind of human.
This goes back to Hammurabi, though. Hammurabi had the same thoughts. This was just a thought no one else had, that everyone else had in the ancient world other than Israel.
It's kind of like in modern India, where you have Dalits, where Dalits are of the lowest caste. They aren't considered...
You're favored.
...in the same kind of... Almost like they're not really the same kind of humans.
They're not quite human.
They're kind of these untouchables that have such bad...
Superhuman.
...whatever for their theology. But in the ancient world, in the Roman world, and the Greek world, which were two very powerfully slave-driven cultures, the slave was considered like kind of... like destined for their position, is how kind of Aristotle puts it.
They're fated to be where
Kinda
they
like
are.
your oxen. Your oxen are there to plow the field, and these people are there.
It's slightly different.
Yeah, they have
because
a little more rights.
It's more about like they were. That's like what your form was about, like in the sense of like the clothes you would don and the things that you would do are fated to your caste, and it was really a caste.
It's
system.
a class warfare system that was.
And you could be a freed person, and suddenly, you were intended to become a freed person, not intended as a slave, because you were really this kind of a person. And so, it's just a weird way of focusing on it, and it's not anything like American slavery.
Yeah,
Old Testament slavery is radically different than Greco-Roman slavery. You see, the Hebrew people didn't run their economy off of slaves.
No.
It was really a last-ditch effort to keep people from
falling into destitution.
Yeah, falling into destitution. But because I'm reading one of the things that I was reading here, and actually it's an IVP dictionary that's called the Dictionary of the Latter New Testament and its Developments. So it was a pretty good dictionary. It came out in the late 90s, but one of those you had to get in seminary kind of thing. And they've just got really good information. And one of the points they make is there was only historians have only indicated 5 known slave economies in history, and those were the Greeks, the Romans, and then the Brazilians, the Caribbean, and then southern United States, the south of the United States. And so a lot of people go like, see, it's the same as the U.S. They were Greek, the Greek and the Romans and these guys were all slave economies, but their concept of slavery was radically different. And then
it wasn't based on race.
In fact, in this article, and I'll just kind of give you some of this, they say modern readers have to overcome their temptation to read into any ancient Jewish, Greek, or Roman text their knowledge of modern slavery. The meanings of any familiar sounding terms can be determined only by a close investigation of particular social systems. So they go into this idea of, number one, that an enslaved person generally could not be identified by their appearance or even their clothing. There was no racial or ethnic origins were not reliable indicators of social or legal status in the ancient world.
You could have jobs, you could have property in Rome. Even in Rome, slaves had other slaves.
Very likely you'd walk around and you would never know that you were talking to a slave. You would have no clue, because it's not like you would have known. They were given freedoms. They were in certain ways. Now, it says the cultural and religious traditions of slaves were usually those of their owners and other free persons. They were free to worship as they wanted. Education of slaves was encouraged, enhancing their value. Slaves were function highly responsible, sensitive positions such as a workshop, household managers,
sea captains,
accountants, tutors, personal secretaries,
bailiffs in the court system,
physicians, doctors. In fact, an important minority of slaves had considerable influence and social power, even over freeborn persons.
Yeah.
So like if you were the slave of the Caesar,
you don't touch that guy. He has the most power in many senses than most people in this community.
yeah, so by no means were the enslaved regularly to be found at the bottom of the socioeconomic pyramid. They had their own money. They
could travel
oftentimes,
if given permission by the landowners.
they could own property, including their own slaves, like you just said. The seventh thing is that slaves were owned by persons across a range of economic levels. They developed no consciousness of being a social class or suffering a common plight. So they didn't identify with each other. Oh, you're a slave, I'm a slave too. It would be almost like running around. Like, this is what's weird about, like, in America, we would say it's like, oh, you're an employee, I'm an employee too. Like, we wouldn't do that. It's like, we try to do that with
You
classes.
might say work sucks for me and it does
Yeah.
for you, but
So, and in contrast, New World slavery, ancient owners did not regard their adult slaves paternalistically. They clearly distinguished, and what that means is like, as I'm your dad, you know, kind of,
they didn't feel
your
any
father.
responsibility
Yeah.
to take care of them.
they
in any
clearly
way.
distinguished the roles of parents and owners and felt no need to justify the institution of slavery.
It was bad, and antebellum slavery is unique in some senses. It is very different from the ancient world. But I don't think the Bible is endorsing either of these particular worldviews. In fact, as Jews being conquered by Rome, they're trying to live under honoring the Old Testament laws in a system where they have this new law that's governing them, and so there's tension there, even within those communities.
Yeah, and then they could anticipate being released by the age of 30.
Yeah, that was weird. When I read that, I thought that was really odd. So most people could, especially if you're born into it, could work off the situation you're in by the time you were 30.
In fact, it was expeditious to you to become a slave. Like,
Most people sold themselves. Most people in that condition were there on their own choice.
you didn't have contracts like we have. You know, like if you were, people have contracts. When you go hired, they didn't do interview processes. They didn't ask you, hey, are you going to work hard for me? Basically, you were a day laborer. We're trying to figure out how to get on a field to work.
Or learn a skill.
And try to be apprenticed by somebody. But if you didn't have that in your family, and you came across
die.
a destitute situation, you're starting to run out of money, you would literally say, I'm going to sell myself to this person for this job, to do whatever they need me to do. And they would give them immediate money. So this was a form of almost patronage in some sense. And the
whole system's
and
patronage.
that money, that stock of what they would be given would then be used to actually begin in some cases, depending on what they were doing, it would begin to build their wealth from that, and they would begin to care for their family from that, and you would work to pay that off, and it was kind of a known amount of time. So a very different world, very different concept.
I think people don't understand that Peter and Paul in the Old Testament, they're not saying like, oh, this is a great system, we endorse it, thumbs up, this is the way God wants it to be. And for some people, they read into that situation without knowing the local environment of what that would be like to live in that situation. They're concerned about spiritual concerns first, I think, in primary, and then they're trying to help people live within those systems to try and bring about a change. So I think that's the difference.
And you see this a lot, with commentators that are talking about things that are going on, in reality, and then people see you condone that. And it's like, I'm not saying I condone it. I'm saying this is what is going on, and kind of that's the biblical thing too. It's like, they're talking about what is going on, and then everybody's like, "See that? They condone it. They're endorsing it."
What other vision did they have?
Yeah.
I mean, this is an
hard.
over 400-year-old institution.
It's
in
older
some
than
cases.
that.
Well, I mean, like
Yeah.
in the way that
In the way the Romans did
Greeks
it?
and the Romans had established this pattern for 200 years. The Greeks had already had it before that, and so you're sitting here going like. That's like saying, why are you guys not getting rid of employees? Like, this is the worst system
why are
in
you
the world.
exploiting these employees?
And you're like, what are you talking about? Like, that's just how life is. Like, yeah, sometimes you got a bad boss, but it's like, you don't care. You leave your businesses. You don't have any loyalty. Like, you could foresee a future where they look at our system and go like, what in the world was wrong with you people that you would even why wasn't the church against that? And you're like, wow, that was out of the concept of their worldview.
Not to mention, though, that like in our world, we have things that we're currently more concerned about that we think are on a higher list because of the time that we live in. And they don't understand that they had different presses and different pressures at the times that they lived in. And there were other concerns, one of them being not dying every 5 minutes, because people died a lot back then because of the elements, just because of the harshness of the nature of the world. And so the idea that you have all these freedoms and you think, oh, this freedom should be for everyone. So the past had the same luxuries that you did. The reason why we have the ability in the current age to go, this is wrong, this whole system that even the Romans did is not better for humanity, is because that we've built off the backs of seeing those results. Where they didn't see it, we now see it, because coming along, there were certain biblical principles, I think, that led to the idea of how to govern better, to treat people better, because they're all created equal, created in the image of God. And I think that's the thing that struck me when I was looking at this text, is the fact that Jesus came and he could have overthrown Roman slavery, but he chose to do something different. He chose to focus in on the slavery that I think most people don't want to talk about, and that is the spiritual slavery, the idea that we are in captive to ourselves, our sins, and to the powers and principalities, and that kind of bondage we don't actually think of as worse than having some kind of physical thing happen to us. That I actually think that in some ways, some people who are misused and abused in prisons are freer in their hearts and souls than the people that are holding them captive. And this idea and concept comes from the fact that they think of something higher than just their own physical well-being, and that's how they're able to endure suffering. And that's where you really get your abolitionist movements, your other things, is they really saw that Christ came to spiritually love people and to break them free. And once they were free, now that transcends on how to treat human beings. Once you have that freedom, you now can face a lot of injustices and fix a lot of wrongs, because now we know how to treat each other created in the image of God. So once you establish that we're all created in the image of God, that concept is so revolutionary, remarkable, that it was remarkable even in the ancient world, because no slave was thought of as being created in the image of God. Only the king usually was in the Old Testament. In the New, we're still to this point where we don't think of other fellow human beings as human beings. We think of them as not worthy of being treated with dignity and respect. Well, where did this idea come from? Well, it comes from the Bible. And later on, abolitionists saw people created in the image of God need to be treated a certain way. And that's where we get the idea, even the concept of human rights. It's where we get the concept of people having rights at all, that they're endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights that come from them, from they're created in the image of God.
And I get humanism loves the concept of valuing humans equally, but they don't have any grounds.
They don't even have historical grounds.
Which is why Peter Singer's concepts, who is a philosopher from Princeton, and he holds to the viewpoint that humans are just animals and all animals have equal value with humans.
Yeah,
because we're just speciesists at that point, and it's this whole movement for animal rights and stuff like that. And that's what it's going to break us down. And that's why I think we're finding that, to be honest, even in our current culture, I mean, drop employment for a minute. Like that applies easily to everybody in our workplace, in our church, and to most people probably listening. But what if somebody grabs hold of this podcast and is a sex slave, and they manage to hear about it, like, and then they hear us saying, like, oh, slaves, servants, be subject to your master, like, with all respect, I mean, is that how we're going to apply that one? Are we telling the sex slave who is literally stuck in a room, scared of their pimp, broken, and their family is being held hostage by a government or a cartel or a gang back in another country, and they truly believe that somehow they have no ability to escape? Even if you could get them out, they are literally psychologically tortured and scared to leave. Like, I actually don't think this applies there.
No.
That's why pastors apply this to employees. It's actually far closer to our employment world than it is to any form of modern, wicked, disgustingly evil slavery that we have today, which is kidnapping. It's extortionary. It is like, these are the things that Christians fight against. They do the most. We still have an amazing record when it comes to fighting slavery, even in the modern realm. I think you looked it up. How many people are in the United States right now?
400,000 people currently enslaved in the United States. Currently, it's still a continuous issue going on, and especially a lot of the sex trade, and a lot of them are children. and it's a huge plight on in America. It's a blind spot for a lot of people, and this is my big concern when people talk about slavery from antebellum slavery, which I am concerned about as a social issue. The ramifications of antebellum slavery has interfered with our ability to get along, but if you really care about the effects of slavery, imagine what is currently being experienced by Chinese people being crossed across the border by coyotes, people in situations that they've been kidnapped from their homes. This is currently an epidemic that is going on in our nation right now. So I would love to see the fervor for how the effects of slavery on our modern culture, what right now in America, and people freeing those slaves. And I think that's a bigger concern for me. And it doesn't mean you don't concern yourself with the other forms of the fallouts. It means that you should really be zealous for the ones that are currently experiencing
which is why another thing is, like, I think we should join with secular people and other groups that are opposed to slavery. And if you're truly opposed to slavery as a secular person, you will be opposed to pornography. You will stop viewing it. You will stop engaging it. You will stop, even if you want to call it ethically sourced and all that garbage. Look, it's just, it is giving money to the entire sex industry that is running the massive slave movements that we have today. And that is something that we have to be, like, we have to just stand up and just say, we're done with the sexual revolution. It has failed, and it is now grown to ramifications that we've returned to more slaves now than ever in the history of the United States. That's crazy.
It's crazy. And I mean, a lot of times too, I think when we think of slavery, we think of these rough lives, no joy, no happiness in their life, and hardworking. And I mean, even in the free world, right, United States, that those kind of lives were the norm to some degree. You just go into the 1900s, children working in mines, children working in factories. It wasn't slavery; they were considered free, but life was tough. Life was hard.
It was a different kind of slavery,
and I think
it was for a lot of kids.
It was, but
work for the man.
Yeah, and but it's just the difficulty that poverty brings, and now we live in much more rich lifestyle, and so we feel like we're probably one of the few areas that the country as a whole, and I get it, there is poverty still, there is all that stuff, but we just feel like this is the way the world always was, and it's like, no, it's a pretty new concept, the affluence of a country.
Just child labor is a thing that never was a thing until anti-child labor laws are very new in history.
Yes, very new.
You needed your kids to work a farm. But now that when we went into the industrial age where we had machinery and we didn't quite know how to operate in the same model, had to be adjusted because kids weren't smart enough to operate heavy machinery, and they were just thought of as free labor. They didn't think of them as being developed. But those come because, hey, we need to treat people with dignity and respect.
But it also there's a residual effect too, and that is that we've kept children from learning trades. And so now, unfortunately,
we've kept them from growing up. And
they're like being responsible. There's an entire move that those laws were like. There's a problem with policy and law when it overreaches. The intention is good. We don't want kids losing their hands. We don't want kids, at 5 years old or 10 years old because they're small, putting things in where they should in sweatshops. No. That's not what we're talking about. But then we suddenly go like, well, they shouldn't. Kids are too young to work hard for their family. That's poor, and maybe they've got a single mom and they're 12 and they're capable of actually helping out and sweeping a shop, or they're capable of helping out and running and throwing out the newspapers, which are gone. Whatever. It's like these kinds of jobs disappear and the responsibility disappears, and you actually, I think in some ways we could argue it's more harmful to the poor to not enable them to appropriately allow age-appropriate jobs to exist. Now, I mean, that sounds crazy, I know, but again, I think that there's a lot of tendency to overreach. Having 3 boys, and a daughter, and 2 of them working pretty hard now and getting a lot of money because it's fast food. my goodness, the other two are like they want to work and they get frustrated that they can't.
Do they not have work permits anymore? You can't.
I mean, like it's
probably pretty heavily regulated now.
15.
Yeah,
It used to be 13 when I was young, because my buddy worked at Carl's Jr. at 13, and he loved it because he was so young to do anything, but he liked working there. But it also was just really helpful for him, and his family. But so yeah, there is something that says that sometimes we think laws are going to be the ones that model behavior, and laws are usually meant to to help people regulate behavior, but it never is devoid of the model. So you can't just rely on the law to do something. You still have to, if you solve one problem, not create another with a law. And so the idea of, well, then how are we going to have positive things in our society that helps kids grow and learn the true value of work, and so that by the time they're thrown into a In-N-Out Burger or Chick-fil-A or whatever it is that you're working at, that you realize, man, work is really hard. And that's such a shock to this generation who's been very protected for a long period of time from hard labor, that once you are...
Even in school, labor of your mind cannot be necessarily...
Well, physical labor, I mean, like literally, working even in a cash register, thinking through standing on your feet for 6 hours. A lot of people don't do that as a kid. And so to me, it's a shock. It wasn't a shock to me, but it's a shock to a lot of these kids who are like, they want me to work on the weekends. Can you believe that? And I was like, well, we live in you don't get that on a farm. You'd have to start working in a farm.
Now, I think back to the slavery kind of stuff, because I think it's interesting for the sake of like the current slave problem in the United States. Like this is a difficult thing. Notice you can't just go, we're going to abolish it's already abolished.
Yeah, the laws aren't going to protect these things. People are doing it illegally.
And so, but what happens is that there is a want, there's a desire that people have that they think it needs to be, they actually equate it to a need, like sex is somehow now a need. And so, this is okay. Like this, kind of like this is the same logic that's used in the South. And so this is what upsets me when I'm like, how many of these young kids are really joining the new abolition movement to stop this stuff? How do you think through it? How do you find them? No, it's too scary. I might lose my life. I don't know where they are. It's not a problem in my life. It's like, welcome to the other arguments that many people felt.
During slavery.
Yeah.
Antebellum slavery.
And so to be an abolitionist isn't easy. So as churches, we find people. Do we have priest holes and we hide them now, contrary to government, to keep them safe? How do you do this kind of stuff? And these are questions that churches are having to address and deal with in the current state. And there is a lot of it, because there's just a lot of complicated issues surrounding these situations. But everybody's agreed we want it gone.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, too, the other thing about even the biblical concept, just people thinking that somehow one verse endorses the entire system of every situation that's occurring, it just tells me you're not familiar with Scripture. So a lot of people who criticize Scripture, they look at it as some kind of, they look at it like a law. Like once something's stated, it covers every possible scenario. So then they find the one scenario that doesn't fit the Scripture, and they go, see, it's endorsing or it's doing this. And I'm like, you don't really read things. You must have a hard time with the Constitution and other things where you have to integrate thoughts and beliefs. And so you have other verses like Ephesians and you have Colossians. You have all these other verses that really spell out a worldview.
Do you think it's because a lot of people just think, we were told, you Christians, just a book tells you what to do and you do it?
Yeah. I don't think that they don't. I sometimes some Christians might help with that thought process as well, but they don't really understand how much critical thinking has been gone into the Bible.
I like curious or careful thinking, because critical is negative. But anyway,
critical is negative to many people.
But what I'm getting is we had. Do you remember we had that one event where
we had a debate
years ago? I don't even know if it's out there on the internet anymore, but it's
still out there.
We had this awesome conversation with a couple of one guy was a scientist and the other lady was a free thinker, and
she was part of the Atheist Society, I think it was.
Yeah, they were just trying to tell us, well, you guys just have a book and the book tells you what to do, and almost like this really weird way of talking about it. I was like, that is a strange way to view it. And then I brought up no, there's a scientific concept called hermeneutics. It's like a way to interpret a text to try to get to the original intent of the author and what it means. And they looked at me like, what are you talking about? And it's like, there's a lot of people who have no concept about how appropriately interpreting literature in general, let alone an ancient text, that you're actually trained in. It's not just I get to pick this thing up and make up whatever I want. It's there has to be some research, and there's work to do.
You can see this when someone like Sam Harris just starts saying stuff, and you're like, I don't think he's read what he's talking about. But no one else knows what he's talking about. They just assume it. And I'm just like, I'll sit there and listen and go, that isn't at all what the text is saying. And how do you only cherry pick that one idea and not read all the other ideas in totality?
I think I watched this video of a conversation with somebody who was anti-God, and somebody was questioning them, and it kind of, to me, it sums up where a lot of people are at right now, and he was bagging on Christianity and God, and so the guy that he was bagging on asked him a question. He said, "Okay, listen, if there was proof that there's a God, and so you absolutely were convinced that God is real, then, would you, follow him?" And he kind of was like, well, it depends on what the evidence was. And it doesn't matter. It was presented to you in a way that you absolutely believed that there is a God. Would you then follow him? And he was like, well, it depends on what he asked me to do. It depends on if I agreed with him or not, or if I thought. And so it really came down to, even if I was convinced that there is a God, I would still determine for myself whether or not what he says is good,
Yeah.
And it's like, well, didn't we start out with that problem? and I do feel like that's kind of where everybody's at, where it's like, I just want to poo-poo the idea that there's a God, but if I was convinced of it, then I would still decide for myself whether or not he was right, and he would be right in the things that I felt were good, and he would be wrong in the areas that I felt like it wasn't good.
Yeah, and just to complete the story, is we often are looking at passages. We're not looking at, we're not thinking of God. What does God really want? What does God, how does God want to treat people? Did God in the Old Testament actually set up a system of slavery? That's not anywhere here. Like he has to capitulate to so much bad things that we do to get us to see things that start the cure in our hearts. And so there's a spiritual triage that actually goes on where God lays these foundations, we ignore them, and then he has to focus on the one thing that's causing us to suffer the most to get us back to where he really wanted us to be in the first place. And when you look at the Bible, he's always wanted people to get along, care for each other, produce good things with the land, and treat each other and serve him and serve each other. Mm-hmm. That's the first thing. Then later on, people start sinning, and then slavery shows up.
Well, what I really think is critical is that you read the Bible from a perspective also that, God knows what we need to know in order to communicate to us well.
Yeah.
What I mean by that is, so he sets up all these rules about slavery, and he does it, it's done as ethically in a fallen world as I think I've ever seen, in an attempt to keep people from falling off. But then he's filled the language of the Hebrew people with a concept of this servant who's willing to serve, even if, because they've been treated so well, they've been cared for so well, they're like, I'm never going, give me the gold watch. I'm in for life. I will never retire from this business. Love this job. I love you as a boss. Where you go, I go.
They usually marry into the family too.
Yeah, concept. And so he gives this beautiful picture of these bond slaves, right? That's what they're called. And you put your ear against a door and it's all driven through. And then you have this earring that is the evidence you're somebody's bond slave, that you've chosen this out of your own will. And then you get these pictures of kings. You get all this language that is built up throughout the Old Testament. And then it lands in this chapter of Isaiah 52, which is just, to me, so beautiful, because when he starts talking about the fact that there's this one coming. In fact, what's weird is the Septuagint would say it's the child, his child. But Yahweh speaking, says, behold, my servant, my slave shall act wisely. He shall be high and lifted up. He shall be exalted. As many were astonished at you. His appearance was so marred beyond human symbols. I mean, he goes into all this conversation. And it's as if God knew the vast majority of human beings who would exist in this world would exist in some form of servitude. Even today, more humans still live in servitude than in the kind of the freedom that we think of. Like,
everyone has a boss.
everybody's got a boss, but even more so in many countries, you are working in a sweatshop, you are working in a situation where you can't get out of. And Jesus didn't come and say, I am the great Caesar. I identify with Caesar. I identify with the great kings. I identify with Hammurabi. He doesn't come and identify with Elon Musk and identify with the president of the United States. He says he's a servant. He comes as a slave. So that when you read this list in 1 Peter, I mean, he starts off and he's just like, look, Christians, guys, you're going to have to suffer, do good works. And he's like, with the government, just live as what? Freed people. Well, that's weird. Why is he talking freed people, which is very much a concept of slave and freedman concepts going on there. He's like, even under the government's auspices, all this stuff, you're free. And then he goes, by the way, all you slaves out there, I've just told you to live free. So willingly submit yourself to your master, even if he's bad, because guess what? Jesus willingly submitted himself, and he's literally saying, I just want to lift you up. God identifies with you. I want women. You're the greatest group of people on the planet who have suffered are women. Satan has something out for them. I don't get it. But it is.
They produce life.
It is they keep making more humans. Right? It's like
you can get rid of them, then wow, they're not going to have as many humans.
He cannot stand women, and it's fascinating when you think about it in those terms, because women have suffered so greatly throughout history, and the women alive today, man, be blessed that you're alive right now. You've got the greatest existence women have had throughout history and in the world right now. And then you turn around, and what does he tell? He doesn't start with the husbands. He says wives, as we'll get into next week. And it's as if he's saying, listen, I know what it's like to be under. I know, and this is God talking here. Like, he identifies with those who suffer, those who struggle. And I just find the people who want to, argue like, oh, you guys just obey. I think we had a comment like, you guys just obey because, you're scared of, God's going to punish you to go to hell and stuff like that. I'm like, what I see is I want to obey because I've got a God who punished himself with hell. I've got a God who doesn't identify with the powerful and the arrogant and the braggadocious and those who would tell you, I'm going to put you in jail if you don't obey me. He goes, no. I'm going to go to jail for you to show you how much I love you. I'm going to identify as the slave and suffer as a slave. And that is the beauty of the gospel. And it takes this language of slavery and it flips it on its head to go from one of the most difficult, arduous, horrible situations humanity faces to you are identified by God himself as one who is like me. That is beautiful to me. So,
I think the tail end of that is justice. I do believe because of my faith, it covers a need for justice, in the sense that I believe now that there is an arbiter of justice who is that servant, who knows what the people who've been hurt the most have gone through and is going to adjudicate that and make it right. So that's why the passages later on and say things like, "Masters, obey your servant," because heaven knows what I'm going to do if you...
Kevin or heaven?
Kevin.
Oh, Kevin.
Not Kevin, but heaven.
Heaven, got it.
Yeah, heaven. Kevin may know. I don't know. Maybe you do. But heaven knows, because that's the thing I want to say to those people right now who you think that God doesn't see that you have a slave, or you're abusing somebody right now and you think you're getting away with it, you're making all this money. Remember, when you die, you're going to stand before God and have to answer for the things you do to other people. And so keep that in your mind. As you have control or power. And that goes from everything from people who are abusing people, even in their parental roles or different things, that there is a God who is going to make everything right in the end. And I believe that so strongly that I'm able to endure a lot of things because of it. But it doesn't mean that we don't stop and when we see those injustices as a society, put ourselves in sacrificial ways to bring about the good for them as well. And that'll cause us to suffer as well. And that's really what the civil rights movement was based off, the best parts of the civil rights movement. So.
Well, that's a lot, guys. Thanks for joining us. We hope that you have been encouraged. We hope that maybe we've answered your question if that was you texting in, and maybe you've got some similar situations. But whether you're struggling through something and you'd like prayer, whether you're wrestling through a question and a difficult ethical situation, you would like advice. Maybe you're just got a Bible question. We would love to hear from you. You can let us know again at rabbittrail@obcc.church. That's rabbittrail@obcc.church. You may know someone else who has one of those kind of situations, and they're asking you for help. Pass along the question. We would love to do our best to address it and help wherever we can. We really do believe that the Word of God is powerful to give us answers to our situations, and that our God, he knows what we're going through. He loves us. And so we hope that you are able to find comfort and find strength in your workplace and wherever you're going through, whatever suffering you may be in. But we're just glad you joined us, and we hope that you have a great rest of your week.
Boom, chuck, luck.
Bye.